Welcome to our part 4 of the Safety Services webinar. Today, we once again have Nuala Mullen from Rockwell Automation, who's the Business Development Lead for Safety Services. And she'll be covering, kind of putting everything together that we've been going over for the past couple months. Just as a reminder, we do have the recordings for lockout, tagout, arc flash safety, and machine safety. If you did miss those or wanted to go back and watch them, if you did attend those webinars, you have a link for the videos and the content. If you don't have that link or forget, you can just go to YouTube and search for HESCO ASG. And that'll bring you to our YouTube channel where we put all of our content up there, and you can go back and take a look at those videos. And again, you'll get a copy of the recording of this webinar to look back and take a look at whenever you want on demand. And also any of the PowerPoints that you see and extra handouts and collateral we'll have in a message back to you in the next day or so. But with that, I will hand things over to Nuala Mullen.
Thanks, Chad. Today, we are going to talk about creating a sustainable safety plan. And what I mean when I talk about that is really how do you put kind of all of the pieces of safety that we've been talking about in the past 3 webinars together and kind of create that sustainable plan, right, that's resilient to all the changes that you might see, right? And so in the past, 3 episodes of our sort of webinar series, it was designed to kind of equip safety managers and safety champions in organizations to help develop sustainable safety programs around hazardous energy control, right? So your lockout tagout program for electrical safety and machine safety. And we've sort of identified how they are the kind of the backbone of a company's worker safety program. And in this episode, we're going to put it all together and talk about how to develop a comprehensive plan. But first, what I'm going to highlight is a change management story, and it's Rockwell's. And what we are going to be talking about is kind of how we, got some new equipment in and how we leaned really heavily on our safety plan, which we're going to talk about putting together in order to make sure that when we brought that equipment in, we knew that employees were going to be safe. So our headquarters is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And we had manufacturing there for a number of years. And then it turned into some office space, and we just brought back manufacturing into that facility on a contactor line. And you'll see a picture over there on the right. But this was a change for us in a pretty significant way. One, we were bringing manufacturing back, but also we had a lot of new technology for this new line, right? And we had a lot of challenges that were faced by our EHS team, right? So we hadn't had manufacturing in the site for a while. It's primarily was an office space for a number of years, and our EHS team didn't have the machine safety standard expertise really as they started bringing in this equipment. And so what they did is they relied heavily on their management of change processes and their overall safety plan. And that allowed them to identify and bring in kind of the right resources, right? So how do we really approach this, right? Making sure that they were leaning on that cross-functional team. And that's expertise from all areas, not just EHS, right? That was expertise from our engineering team, and from a number of others within the organization, right? So that as we were getting this equipment in and we were looking at it, that we had the right things in place from a safety perspective, right? We also had help on the robot and automation side. We worked with a team lead from a safety perspective. They were responsible for the overall safety of the project. And it was a really successful safety plan as we brought in those folks. And it was really successful as we brought that in. So we're going to talk today about kind of the development of those plans and then how you rely on them as you go through change. And I think as we talk about, I think about delivering a safety, developing a safety plan in a facility, really one of the key things that's really difficult is that safety in the facility is constantly being affected by change, right? You might have some corporate budgets and priorities that might be changing. You'll notice that arrow is going down, not up, right? Typically, right, those priorities and budgets, they change over time. And so you really want a plan that is resilient in the faces of those kind of changes in priorities. You're also likely to have equipment modernization, right? Whether that's getting new equipment in, like we did from an equipment builder, or whether that is looking at older equipment in a facility and looking at modernization, both for performance or for just safety alone, right? How does that, how do you manage that kind of modernization going on in your facilities? There's also standards evolution, right? Safety standards are constantly evolving as technology changes, as best practices change around safety. And so how do you incorporate those safety standards and their changes into your overall plan and plan for the fact that they're going to change? And then there's also a workforce turnover. Increasingly, we see with customers that workforce turnover is a really big challenge. And how do you kind of manage that, make sure that people are trained and up to date on the policy so they know how to safely interact with equipment. And really the biggest question is, how do you create that resilient safety plan in the in the face of all of these changes that are kind of happening all around us? So when we look at the potential risks here from this ongoing change, really there's several, right? So when you are looking at how those changes that I highlighted in the previous slide, how they might affect risks, right? You've got the risk of personnel injury and litigation, the risk of non-compliance, right, to the standards as they change, risk of equipment obsolescence. That is a big driver of when machines are upgraded, right? So as you go through that and your engineering teams and your production teams are looking at modernizing equipment as it's obsoleted, right? How do you manage safety there? And then you also have downtime due to lost time incidents, and then brand reputation, right? More and more with the rise of social media and things like that, what we find is that people are quick to send a tweet or give a little post, right, on something that's going on in those facilities, and they really do. Some of these safety incidents can have a negative impact on your brand reputation. So how do you manage that, right, as you build your plan? So to dive in here, what are the components of a successful safety program? And this is very similar to what we look at when we develop these plans, right? So first, right, the question is what's the status, right, across, whatever level you're at, whether it's a single facility, whether it's multiple facilities, right? What is the safety status of where I'm responsible? And then after you do that, after you kind of understand the state of the situation, then you're going to want to go ahead and define those standards, right? So select the standards that you're going to adhere to, and then the deliverables and methodologies that you're going to use, right? So if you are looking at a lockout program, right? So you might have a federal standard, right, which is 1910.147. You might have a state-specific standard, but select the standards, but then also, right, what are the deliverables and methodologies that you're going to use to develop that plan, right? What does that policy look like for you? Same with machine safety and arc flash, right? So select those standards and then define the deliverables and methodologies to be used, right? And then assess and prioritize. And this is a really big one, right? So when you define your standards and how you're going to kind of adhere to those standards, the next thing that you really need to do is to assess where the equipment is in relation to those standards and then prioritize it. So in the previous session for machine safety, Robert Bertley talked about how to prioritize risk on equipment. And really what you want to look at there is trying to prioritize the risk so that you can make the appropriate investments in safety in your facility, right? So in Robert's presentation from in the third series, he talked about conformity audits, right? And that really is a qualitative assessment, kind of a prioritization. So then you can say, okay, my biggest risks from a machine perspective, right? It might call out lockout tagout. Maybe I've got some real deficiencies in my lockout tagout program that I need to address, right? And that would come out of kind of those assessments that you would do, or those audits that you would do. Maybe it's not lockout. Maybe you've got a great lockout program, but potentially you've got issues with guarding on a certain set of machines. And so you might take the opportunity to go through those high priority equipment and go through a formal risk assessment on those to assess what recommendations you might have from a machine perspective, what mitigation techniques you might use from a machine perspective to really take a chunk out of that risk and bring the risk on that particular piece of equipment from a very high level right down to an acceptable level of risk. So really going through that assessment process to define where my facility is and how I want to kind of approach it is really important, right? And then through that assessment process, you'll be able to prioritize what kinds of investments you want to make in your facility from a safety perspective. But really the goal is right, taking kind of the biggest bite out of the places where you can get the most risk reduction, particularly as you're beginning that safety journey. And then from there, right, I'm going to validate my systems and processes and procedures that need to be used in order for me to get there, right? So once I prioritize my action plan, right, then I'm going to go validate what it is that I need to do to kind of get there. And then from there, I have to implement it, right? So that strategy, I'm taking that strategy that I've just validated and I'm implementing it in the prioritized way that I kind of found from that assessment, right? And then from there, it's about maintaining it. And that's really where the kind of resilient part goes in, right? Is as things change, right? Does your assessment and priorities change, right? It could be that you want to, instead of taking, hey, these are, my 10 machines with the biggest risk, maybe I want to focus on a particular machine type instead as my priorities change. Things like that. All of those kind of approaches, right? When you're going into that maintain phase, having that flexibility as your priorities change and being able to assess that and kind of continue through this cycle is really important to creating these plans, right? So when we talk about these kinds of agreements, really what you want to do first is define and document those safety guidelines and that philosophy. It's really a journey. It doesn't happen all at once. My colleagues and I, when we're working with customers on safety plans, these are often multi-year programs when we are helping customers first kind of with the addressing of significant risks, right? So how do we kind of take a big bite out of the equipment or the area that has the most risk to employees? And then we kind of work with them from kind of addressing those big risks, right? How do we get to full compliance, right? Looking at your lockout program, your arc flash program, your machine safety programs. How do you get to kind of that full compliance state? And then after that, it's really a question of safety optimization, right? So as I get new equipment in, what kinds of, or make equipment upgrades, what kinds of updates can I do to the safety side to really optimize not only the safety on that piece of equipment, but optimize the production as well. And those are some things that you can get into as you really work on those plans, right? And you get to that maintain phase and you really can start looking for places to optimize safety. Chad and I were on a call or on the phone just before this call, and he reminded me of this great anecdote. And I think it's really apt here as we talk about this journey. When you used to look at safety for equipment, right? In the bad old days, right? It was like no safety at all, right? Like don't put your hand there, kind of things, right? And everything was just kind of open and unguarded. And then people said, okay, we've got to figure out a way to keep people from these sort of dangerous conditions. And so the solution there was really, typically it was hard guarding, right? The technology didn't exist like it does today, right? But one of the big challenges with hard guarding, right, is that you can't get in to the equipment. So people need access to it to do things. And so then as we started to evolve, we got better technology, and that technology can actually allow us to increase production and increase our equipment OEE by allowing us to do things like take advantage of the minor servicing exception for lockout tagout, which allows us to use an alternative protection method in lieu of a full lockout tagout for certain routine repetitive tasks that are integral to production. And those things can really add up in terms of an OEE. And so when you look at it, it's kind of like the analogy of riding a bike, right? We used to have, ride a bike, nobody would have a helmet on, and don't fall off, right? Was don't fall off and hit your head was kind of the way it went. And then as we move forward, we got helmets, right? And helmets were great, they protected your head, right? But it's really about, they're kind of bulky, they didn't look very good, and they didn't really do anything for you, right? And then as we move forward, right, you've got now when you're doing indoor cycling where you see racers, they've got these kind of super aerodynamic helmets, right? And they're actually doing more for you. They are protecting your head, but they're also doing more to help you go faster, right? And those are the kinds of things that you can take advantage of, right? As you look at safety optimization to also optimize your equipment as well. And you really do that by looking at, by implementing safety across the life cycle, right? So whether, regardless of what phase this particular piece of equipment is in, right, you really want to be able to look at safety across the life cycle. So from a design perspective, what you're looking at is really taking advantage of some emerging design philosophies as you go to build this piece of equipment. And those are things like passive design, right? Making the easy way the safest way, right? And you can, as you design equipment, if you're in that phase designing a piece of equipment from the ground up, you can really look at that and say, well, how do we make the easy way to perform this task the safe way to perform this task? You can also look at configurable system design, right? It helps limit the exposure to hazards while removing the need or incentive really to bypass those, right? So those are also things that you can look at in the design phase. When you're in kind of the build phase, and what you can look at is really taking advantage of common system designs to reduce the cost to build this equipment. So if you are, let's just say you're going through, you're building this equipment, once you go through that verification phase, which Robert talked about, you'll be able to identify, hey, does my safety system really do, as it's designed, really do what's called out in that risk assessment and safety specification. So when you're building that equipment, have I done that, right? Have I verified that I've done that? That prevents us from building a piece of equipment that doesn't meet what we thought it would, that was called out in our design risk assessment. And then when we get to kind of the sustain and improve, it's about maintaining compliance, but it's also looking at other ways that we can improve equipment. And so if we're looking at let's just say, like some customers do, they want to take a class of machine. So it's a specific machine type, let's just say a palletizer as an example, right? How do you look at a class of machines and apply common solutions so that you are saving money on that solution as you go through and update that. Those are the kinds of things that your comprehensive safety program, right? Following that kind of that life cycle journey that I showed you before kind of helps do, right? Because we're taking a systematic approach to that safety plan. And then, right, delivering continued compliance, right? So we've got, in the previous slide, I kind of laid out where the life cycle was, right, trying to manage the entire piece of the entire equipment life cycle. Then it's about delivering continued compliance, right? So you always want to make sure that you're looking at your priorities and your budget for safety, right? And then highlight the risks and adjust the plan accordingly, right? So let's just say your budget shrink. Maybe you can't get to all, maybe you can't get to all of your high priority equipment, but you still know what the highest priorities are. So you can take that, you can look at those assessments and make adjustments to your plans based on that priority. You also want to make sure that your plan is aligned with your corporate safety culture. Not everyone is going to want to make the journey to that sort of optimization through safety technology, right? But maybe you want to get to full compliance. And so you want to make sure that the priorities and plans that you put in place are aligned with that overall strategy. And then when you're talking to your teams, right, share some examples, right, to make that compliance personal. So how do you take that information that you know about your organization and make those priorities personal from a compliance perspective? And then as standards change, right, you can either develop internal expertise, right, or you can rely on outsourced expertise. One of the things that's really interesting is I highlighted our new contactor line early on in the presentation, and they didn't have the expertise directly on their EHS team. Now we have a lot of expertise on our external facing resources, from risk assessment or building those functional specifications, doing the verification, validation, building lockout procedures. We have a lot of that expertise that goes to that we work with customers on, but internally to our EHS department, we didn't have a ton. And so they had to rely on at least expertise external to their teams, really to help build that, to understand what the emerging standards would say about robotics and how to appropriately manage the risk associated with bringing in that new line, right? Making sure that you have the expertise or can rely on someone to interpret the changes to safety standards, because those come out all the time. And how do they apply to your program, and what things might need to change? What's the impact to your program based on those changes, right? Building that expertise either internally or working with a partner who can help you identify that and how you might need to address those changes. And then what is the extent of the change? That is a big question, right? What is the extent of my change and when do I need to do it, right? When we look at standards and how they change, right? Usually there's some sort of deadline for adoption on that new standard, right? So what's the impact to my organization? And then when do I need to do that? And then to just kind of bring it back to our life cycle, right? As that change comes in, right? Then we can look at we can go ahead and look at our standards, right? See how they apply differently, and then assess and prioritize those investments based on when they need to be implemented, right? And how they affect my equipment. And then workforce change, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but how are you supporting your employees with training and change management? Things like access to PPE, right? All of those things are part of any plan, but it makes it difficult sometimes because you're constantly getting new employees, right? So how do you make sure that you've got access to the right things as it for your employees, right? Do they know where to go to get training on lockout tagout? Are they authorized? Are they an authorized employee or an effective employee, right? Do they have access to training on arc flash, on other aspects of machine guarding? Do they know where to get that? You know, how do you manage change in your facility? All of those things are really part of a successful program. And it means, and that successful program helps you when different changes are thrown at you. So how do we make compliance simpler, right? When we talk about compliance, if you just look at standards and if you look at what is happening on, you know, getting new equipment and things like that, right? There are some simple things that you can do to make compliance easier on your employees, right? So where do they go for help? Do they have a place where they feel comfortable going to ask questions about safety, to raise any issues that they've seen? Where do they go for help? And then where is the expertise to respond confidently to those inquiries, right? On machine safety, that may not be somebody that's directly in your facility or directly under your responsibility, depending on where you are in the organization. But are there places to go so that you can find that information to confidently respond to those folks as they come to you about safety? What processes, what other considerations might need to be followed? What processes need to be followed? Things like when you get new equipment in, right? What's your management of change policy? These are all things that you're going to want to consider, right? What happens when an employee sees a gap in safety compliance? How does that work? So those are kind of the key things that you want to think about when you're developing that plan. So when you pull it all together, what it really looks like is evaluating where you are, defining those standards, right? What standards am I going to adhere to? What deliverables am I going to use? Prioritize that, implement it, and then you can maintain it by making compliance simpler, right? By making sure that employees have access to the right information, the right expertise, and that they can report concerns when they see them so that you can go back to that plan, right, and address them. So when we talk about putting that plan together with the right processes, tools, and resources, whether those are internal resources or external, you can reduce risk, right? And really, the past three webinars and this one has been about reducing risk, right? So how do I reduce risk by implementing a compliant lockout program? How do I reduce risk by implementing a compliant arc flash program? How do I reduce risk on my machines by following the safety life cycle? All of those pieces and processes really are about reducing risk in your facility, right? How do you achieve compliance, right? Internal and external standards. So you've got your internal standards, and then we talked about all those external standards and the fact that they're evolving all the time, right? Using a safety plan, a comprehensive safety plan, is going to allow you, it's going to give you the framework, right, to achieve compliance based on those internal and external standards, and allow you to define those tools and processes that you have to achieve that compliance and keep it. And then, you know, from a safety optimization perspective, what you're really looking at as part of that program, when you're considering safety across the life cycle, that allows you the ability to create equipment where, like I said, the easy way is the safe way, right? That allows people to do their work faster. That takes advantage of system designs and new technologies, right? To make sure that you are not only implementing a safe machine, but you're also implementing a productive machine. And so these are all things where when you look at them, you can point back to that successful plan. And really that kind of comes from everything that we've been talking about today right? Going through that sort of plan development life cycle. And finally, what I wanted to talk about was we have, through our team of consultants here and around the globe, we have access to the expertise that can help you build these plans and execute them wherever you are in your safety program. So if you'd like, if it's something that you think that you could use help with in some or all of the things that we've been talking about over our 4-part series, really you can schedule, what we'd like to do is invite you to schedule an introductory discussion with the team at HESCO and myself, right? And so that's really to discuss your safety challenges and your needs, right? And we can help you identify where your gaps are and what your priorities are, right? So really it's a discussion of kind of that first step, right? It's kind of where are you from a safety perspective? And then we can help you identify those gaps and priorities and then work with you to develop a safety plan, right? Whether that's just one part of it, right? Hey, I need help developing my lockout program, making sure that we're able to maintain it, making sure that people are, executing lockouts appropriately, all of those things. However it is that you need help with, and whatever part of the plan is, we have teams of experts here in North America and around the globe to help you do that. And with that, right, and so I encourage you, if you have a need there, or you just want to have a discussion, to reach out to the team at HESCO or myself, and certainly we can talk about how we can help you with those safety plans moving forward. And with that, I will pause for questions from the teams here. And if you have any questions, just feel free to chat or unmute your lines. And I'd be happy to answer questions about this or anything else from our 4-part series.
Hey, Nuala, this is Chad. Thanks. I'm not seeing anything in the chat there, but maybe we'll give a couple more seconds while we do that. Just wanted to thank you for all of your help over these past 4 webinars, and just echo what you said before. We're here to help. Reach out to us, Nuala, myself, anybody at HESCO, anybody at Rockwell, and we're here to pick your brain and help you and guide you through the safety process. So thank you again, Nuala.
Thank you.